Well, everybody, thank you for your patience. We were letting the other folks, as I said, sort of finish their dinner to come on in. And we're filling the house. We had some 250 or so people register for tonight. So we're very happy to see all of you who have come, and a warm welcome to all of you. I'm Claire Lipschultz, and I am a vice president of the National Board of the National Council of Jewish Women. I'm also one of two California statewide policy advocates and a board member of the Sacramento section of NCJW. I and California's other state policy advocate, Barbara Barron, will be tonight's hosts. We're delighted to have so many of you join us today from all across the state, representing a wide variety of advocacy organizations, synagogues, and churches. Please do add your names and what sections or other places you are from in the chat box, typically on the right of your screen. After that, please only use the chat for issues pertinent to tonight and to view the links we provide. As you will hear later, there will be an opportunity for you to ask your questions in the Q&A box. We're thrilled to have such terrific speakers with us tonight to talk about 3 California ballot propositions which will impact the equity landscape of California. But first, a few words by way of introduction. This webinar is being sponsored by NCJW California in partnership with the Sacramento and Los Angeles sections. Most of you know NCJW well, but for those of you who do not know us, the National Council of Jewish Women is a grassroots and national organization of volunteers and advocates who turn progressive ideals into action. Inspired by Jewish values, NCJW strives for social justice by improving the quality of life for women, children, and families. Here in in California, we have 6 sections, one in Sacramento, Contra Costa, San Francisco, Greater Long Beach, West Orange County, Los Angeles, and Saddleback, representing about 4,000 members. The statewide advocacy arm hosting today's webinar, NCJW California, works in the Capitol on behalf of issues aligned with our mission and holds a lobby day every year that brings members from around the state to Sacramento to meet with their legislators. We work in close partnership with a wide range of local and statewide social justice organizations, including the California Interfaith Coalition on issues of poverty, Stronger California, working to advance the economic security of California women, Coalition Against Slavery and Trafficking, and many, many more social justice organizations. The propositions we're discussing tonight are deeply tied to NCJW's core mission and principles: advancing the well-being of women, children, and families, ensuring equal rights and opportunities for all people, and protecting individual liberties and rights guaranteed by the Constitution. We believe that passage of Propositions 15, 16, and 17 will have a historic impact on justice in California. On that note, we would like to take a public moment to honor a true warrior for justice who died last week, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We at NCJW commit to continue her legacy of fighting for equality. May her memory be a blessing. Indeed, may her memory be a revolution and a source of strength for all of us who are in the good fight. Our national organization has been at the forefront for decades, working for a fair and competent judiciary. As of yesterday, we created a website promoting actions around the upcoming Supreme Court nomination, which we are calling Ruth's Revolution. Please see the chat for the link and engage how you can on this most important issue. On to the format of the program. We will hear about the propositions in numerical order. There will be a 10-minute question period following each presentation. You are all on mute, and we appreciate you staying in that mode. Some of you have already submitted questions. others, please write them in the Q&A box, which you can access by hitting the icon at the bottom of your screen. We will get to as many questions as time allows. After all three presentations, we will have a short wrap-up. I now turn the program over to my esteemed co-state policy advocate, Barbara Barron.
Hi, everyone. So welcome again. Thanks, Claire. And we're delighted to have you. You know, many of us don't think about ballot propositions until we sit down to fill out our ballots. And I don't know about you, but I often panic when I do, because sometimes those propositions have huge consequences. And that's certainly true this year. In fact, propositions 15 and 16, which of course we're going to be talking about, actually are aimed at reversing the harm done by earlier ballot propositions. So as Claire said, we're going to take the propositions in numerical order. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to address the following issues. What problem is the proposition addressing? What are its proposed solutions to that problem? What are key concerns that have been raised about the proposition, and how would you address those concerns? What are the most significant benefits of the proposition, and what can we do to advocate for and support it? So we're going to begin with Proposition 15. Proposition 15 increases the funding for K-12 public schools, community colleges, and local governments by requiring that commercial and industrial real property be taxed based on current market value instead of purchase price. We're honored today to have two speakers who work closely together. The first is Sophia Lanza-Weil, who is campaign field director for Prop 15 and has spent 20 years as an organizer, trainer, and facilitator on social justice issues all across the country. Lenny Goldberg is joining her, and Lenny has been around even longer than I have, and in this case, wisdom comes with age. Lenny is an expert on state policy issues, was executive director of the California Tax Reform Association from 1985 to 2015, and most importantly for this conversation, his research on Prop 13 regarding commercial and industrial property led directly to Prop 15. So guys, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for this opportunity tonight. Shana Tova. And it's really great to be here with all of you. I'm going to start us off, and then Lenny's going to, I'll start off with kind of an overview of Prop 15, and Lenny's going to provide some historical context and also a bit about this particular moment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all so you can see what we're talking about. So Prop 15 is an incredible historic opportunity that we have to correct a historic wrong in California. It's also an issue that is truly at its heart a racial and economic justice issue because of it gets at the heart of disinvestment from our communities, particularly public schools and community services. And the communities that have been most impacted by that disinvestment are certainly communities of color and low-income communities. And so this is a real opportunity for us to lift up, a chance for racial and economic justice in California for the betterment of all of us. So what does Prop 15 do? Prop 15 closes a commercial and industrial property tax loophole by making the reassessment of commercial and industrial properties automatic about every 3 years, rather than depending on change in ownership. And for those who are extra excited about tax things, Prop 15 does not change our tax rate, which will remain at 1%, which means that even after passing Prop 15, we'll still have some of the lowest property tax rates in the country. But this will help us balance out the scales and reclaim a lot of money. How much money? We will reclaim $12 billion every single year for schools and local communities. And just to put this in perspective, when we think about what our communities are currently missing out on, just one example is San Francisco County. So San Francisco County, if we pass Prop 15, stands to reclaim $411 million each year. That's just the county. It also would reclaim $10 million each year for the San Francisco Community College District. We have estimates for almost every single county, every school, and every community college. And if you'd like to check those out, you can go to our website, yes15.org. Scroll all the way to the bottom and you'll find your estimates. So a really key part of this is that 92% of the reclaimed revenue is coming from just 10% of the biggest, wealthiest commercial properties. And since we're here with NCJW, I just want to call in that we have an incredible amount of wealth in our state. And our Jewish value of shefa, or of abundance, reminds us that we do better when every single person is cared for, every single person has what they need at a minimum standard. And we really have the economic power to do that by passing Prop 15. So Prop 15 will invest in educating our students, all students, and community services that are vital and necessary to support families and communities. I think we all can agree that a free, quality education is a right and a necessity for all of our communities. And it also gets at the heart of California being able to really cash in on our reputation as a golden state and truly giving every single person an opportunity for both dignity and equality. And so 40% of the funds will go to schools, K through 12, and community colleges. And just want to also say, where schools and community services intersect, 75% of our nurses, our firefighters, and our EMTs come through our community college system, which is one of the biggest workforce training systems in the nation. So just to put those things together, 60% then goes to local counties and cities and special districts to provide those services that we all depend on. Prop 15 protects all residential and agricultural property. This is one of our opposition's big talking points. The fact of the matter is that Prop 15 exempts all residential from any changes. And that's not just things that are zoned as residential, but any place that people live. So zoning doesn't matter in this. If somebody lives there, they're exempt. It doesn't matter how large the residential property, if it's an income property, they're all exempt. It also protects our agricultural land. So agricultural land will continue to be taxed as it currently is under current law. Prop 15 also provides new business relief through tax relief and invests in our communities around them, which of course is also a huge part of having a successful business. You have to run your business in a place people want to live and where people are educated and able to take on jobs. But also, Prop 15 puts in a $500,000 tax cut on the first $500,000 in fixtures and equipment taxes for all businesses, no matter the size. For some businesses that meet certain criteria, small businesses in particular that are independently owned and have 50 or fewer full-time employees, they would be completely exempt from any taxation on fixtures and equipment. So this is a huge benefit to all businesses, but especially our small businesses who are, by and large going to be exempt from any changes, are also going to be getting this tax cut. It also levels the playing field between large businesses and smaller businesses, which at this time we know we need now more than ever. Our small businesses are struggling, and Prop 15 is going to help them not only experience a more level playing field in terms of taxation on their property, but also with this exemption really provide a benefit. So our revenue from Prop 15 will be controlled locally. The key part of this for us when we were thinking about this proposition and how to make it the most effective was knowing that what is needed in, for example, Huron, here's Ray Leon, Mayor of Huron, shouting out his city. What he needs is not what we need in San Francisco or in Oakland or in LA or in Sacramento, right? Our state is huge, it's diverse, it's varied, it's part of our immense strength. growth. And it also means that we're not going to say exactly where every single dollar needs to go. Funding for public education will go through the local control funding formula, which ensures equity. So the schools that need the most funding will get the most funding, though every single district will receive funding through Prop 15. And then that 60% going to the local services, counties, and special districts. And Prop 15 also ensures strict accountability. It is written right into the law that we will receive an annual report from any entity that receives, that either gains or spends any of the funding from Prop 15. It has to be written in plain language, so those of you who are like me who get to try and read those reports when they're convoluted, this is a real relief. It has to be in plain language, easy to understand, and again, it has to be published each year. So ways to get involved with us, we phone bank 5 days a week. We're also writing letters to low-frequency voters. I don't want to steal the thunder of NCJW. I know y'all are also doing those, so maybe do both. And then we also have a pretty robust letters to the editor tool, which you can also find all of this on our website. And we would be so pleased to have you all join us in this movement to reclaim $12 billion a year. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lenny to give some historic context and also the opportunity we have in this moment. And Lenny, you're still on mute. There we go.
Okay, there we go. You know, I was working in the legislature when Proposition 13 passed, and business said, you know, well, we don't really support this. We support protecting homeowners, but they're going to come after business, you know, because of all the advantage. And turns out when the tax cut took place, 2/3 of it went to business, 4 of the $6 billion. And of course, now it's 42 years later, and they have defeated pretty much and stonewalled every possible ability to change it. You know, there's a larger issue here at stake. One of the more wonky issues is that local government finance has been a disaster ever since. There's very little control over revenues. You can have a lot of economic growth and not see those revenues. We have ordinary homeowners and residents are getting hit with fees and exactions and all kinds of taxes. Local businesses are getting hit with all kinds of taxes, and we've really never addressed the tax base for local government. The bigger picture here is that, well, let me speak to the chart here. One of the things that happened. Now, this is Santa Clara County that you're looking at. Since 1978 in Santa Clara County, they had the world's largest commercial industrial growth. Companies like Apple and Google never existed at the time. The biggest companies in the world now exist. What happened? The tax burden in 55 of 58 counties, but you know, Santa Clara is a really good example, world-class industrial growth, and the tax burden shifts from 50-50 to 70-30 pretty much, from residential carrying 70 and business industrial carrying 30, plus all the fees and exactions and other things people have. Now, when Prop 13 passed, there are a number of people said, this is really, that when they look back historically, Reagan came in and said government is the problem, not the solution. It very much was connected to the anti-government, anti-tax ideology that we've seen for the last 40 years. And so part of the importance of this, and I know, you know, people say, oh, we got to call people in Arizona or Nevada to turn out the vote. It is really important in California to turn out the vote so that this issue, we can finally say we're turning around that anti-tax, anti-government view. If there is a progressive administration and new, you know, knock on every piece of wood that we have in terms of the Senate and in terms of the president, it will be extremely important that California says, yes, and we have taxed large corporations and wealthy investors along with that increase. On the negative side, it would be unfortunate if it went down, but in terms of working on turning on out the vote in California, this has national implications, and we really hope that everybody works really hard on it. Okay.
So perfect
Questions?
timing, Lenny. Thank you. I was just about to say.
I usually talk way too long at anybody who knows me.
So there were questions that came in when people registered, and the questions that are pouring in now. So I'm not sure how many we'll have time for. One of the questions, I'm going to try to sort of collapse them. One of the questions was, how can smaller big businesses afford an increase in taxes, especially now? And maybe give some examples of the kind of changes that will occur to their tax burden. And maybe I can tack on, I don't know if it's the same, but a similar kind of question about how owners of small rental buildings are going to be affected. So one of y'all want to?
Okay. Well, we understanding that change after 40 years is a major change. This system has been in place for 40 years. We have allowed for a phase-in. We have allowed for smaller properties under $3 million. Those are exempt from reassessment, and that's where many smaller businesses are. For businesses that have a number of rentals of small businesses, they are not reassessed, brought in till 25, 26, which, as we know about leases, those leases will have expired by then. So those who are concerned about pass-throughs, it's a new negotiated lease at market values. The phase-in allows not just for assessors to take the time to put this up, but it also has explicit allowance for taxpayers where there might be some dislocation. And at the one, you asked about roughly for smaller businesses that qualify, the 1% rate is still among the lowest in the country. And that means it's a matter of, maybe a few $1,000s, which would be offset by the $5,000 that you would get from the elimination of your business equipment. So for things like, where you have possibly larger businesses, we allow for taxpayer phase-in. We try to make for a longer term phase-in, the legislature can set that up. And the amounts are going to be relatively small. Even for large companies, the amounts are small. We figured Intel, which has its property at 1975 values, might pay $30 million a year. Now, they're a $70 billion company. That $30 million is a rounding error for them. But for Santa Clara and for the schools and for the cities there, that's a meaningful number to have $30 million every year. So the numbers are small. Even the largest properties, Chevron, who has not been reassessed for, since 1975 on much of their property, they'll pay some tens of millions of dollars, which is nothing to these multi-billion-dollar companies. So you scale that down to smaller businesses, and it really is not very burdensome. We have phase-ins for taxpayers. There are many ways in which we allow the legislature to make sure that there isn't the kind of dislocation. And with the economy, depending on where the economy is, they can take as much time. That said, it's very likely every assessor knows which the big properties are, those that haven't been paying for a generation in terms of fair taxes. They will bring them on. The 10% that generate 92% of the revenue will come on earlier, and we'll see the revenue flow while avoiding the dislocation for those smaller big businesses.
So yes, I think people are very interested in how this would compare then to taxation in other states. And so maybe you can address that, and then I have a couple of...
What's interesting about Prop 13 when people say, residence is next, which nobody has ever said, but that's what the opposition says. What's interesting is that virtually every state that has property values and rising markets, kind of like California's, where values rise quickly, have protections for homeowners and protections for renters. But virtually none of them have protections for commercial industrial property. So homeowners and renters are protected in most places where you have fairly rapidly growing housing markets, but no one puts that brake on commercial and industrial. And one of the reasons why is a whole lot of this money flows to shareholders, hedge funds, foreign investors, and flows out of the state of California. It will bring more revenue into the state of California for use for our communities.
So, well, of course, I'm old enough to remember what happened when Prop 13 hit and affected our kids' schools. So how, somebody asked, how are the owners of small rental buildings affected?
If it's under $3 million, and we've looked at some of these smaller buildings, they will not be reassessed at all. And if it's a larger building that has a lot of small businesses, they're not phased in till at least 25, 26, when the leases have expired and they can renegotiate those.
And somebody else asked, why did the NAACP why is it or did it oppose Prop 15? This questioner said that the NAACP seemed to suggest that Prop 15 will hurt low-income families, which clearly is what your intent, the opposite of the intent that you've been talking about.
Sophia?
You want me to take this one? All
Sure.
right. So the NAACP of California has opposed. I would just say that they are one part of one group, and not everybody is with us, sadly. However, I think if you look at all of the many, many organizations who haven't just endorsed us, but who have had a part over the last many, many years, decades even, of writing this proposition, working for it, getting a record number. We have 1.7 million signatures that we submitted to get on the ballot. The folks who are our core partners in our executive committee, 99.9% of them are by and for communities of color, low-income communities who have been working on this for many, many years. So while the NAACP, of course, we wish that they were going to be on the right side of history with us on this one, it's one group, and I would just encourage folks to look a little bit more broadly, and also know that it's the statewide. It's not necessarily each and every chapter.
There was a professor who did a study of this, and it's pretty much, the beneficiaries of current system are the wealthiest investors and shareholders. The people who work in the public sector are often minority, much more so than the general public. The services that are provided by counties and cities are critical to low-income communities of color. So, there's a backstory on the NAACP, and we hope people ignore that one anomaly.
So, I have a bunch of questions here, and we only have time for maybe one more. Somebody said, I've already seen false ads from opponents. Will you be able to mount a sufficient TV presence as well as grassroots organizing to combat it? Can you make visible the dark money opposing it?
Well, the quick answer is yes to some of that. We do have many ads ourselves, both on TV and radio, and hopefully you'll be seeing those. We are unfortunately up against opposition, as Lenny said earlier. Folks like Chevron, are some of the biggest supporters of our opposition, are out-of-state corporations, major funders to Trump, other folks like that, and so they have basically unlimited money. So we will never match them dollar for dollar. We do, however, have an incredibly robust field program. We have a huge number of endorsing organizations, including all of you. So we're so glad to have the support of NCJW. And we are getting the word out about who our opposition is, especially I would say that they like to play that they are working class heroes, but in fact they are not. And a little bit of research can show you that. So, we're doing as much as we can, but what we're also really focusing on is reaching out to those voters who need to hear from us, who aren't yet aware of Prop 15, or who are susceptible to some of the lies that our opposition put out. And I say lies because, they wrote their voter guide submission, and a judge actually struck down about 20% of what they put in because it was so false and misleading. That's pretty unprecedented. So just to give folks a sense of what we're up against, it is significant, but we are equal to it, and we are going to win when every single one of us takes action, when we talk with the people that we know, when we get on the phones and talk to voters who have not yet heard from us. As the field director, of course, that's where I put all of my time and energy. And so I just really invite folks to get involved, whether it's in less formal ways of talking to your friends and families and coworkers, or more formal ways like joining one of our phone banks or sending a letter to the editor. Every voter counts, of course, but even more in this election on this particular issue. And we welcome you to join the fight.
So thank you, guys. And at the end of this evening, we're going to also urge people to step up and tell them the ways in which we want to be helpful for pointing them in the right direction at the right moment. So thank you guys a lot. I mean, clearly this is an issue we can talk about all night. I'm sure you frequently do. But we have other important propositions. So we now want to talk about Proposition 16, which also is extremely important and also is aimed at undoing the damage done years ago by Prop 209, in this case by Prop 209.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you guys. And thank you, Lenny, so much, both of you. So Prop 16 would remove the ban on affirmative action involving race-based or sex-based preferences from the California Constitution that was put there by Proposition 209, and many of us are old enough to remember when that happened. We're delighted to have tonight as our speaker, Nancy Appel, who is California Legislative Director for the Anti-Defamation League and a Senior Associate Regional Director for the ADL Central Pacific Region. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. I just want to thank everyone here tonight for this program on behalf of ADL and the Opportunity for All Coalition. It's a pleasure to talk about Prop 16. So by way of background, since 1913, ADL has been countering anti-Semitism and fighting to secure justice and fair treatment to all, as our founding mission mandates. I'm proud to note today that ADL is a leading anti-hate organization in the US. And as part of our commitment to achieving a just and inclusive society, we have a broad civil rights agenda, including supporting efforts to achieving racial and gender equity. Broadly, Prop 16 impacts both people of color and women. But I'm going to begin tonight by examining something that Chief Justice John Roberts famously said about racial discrimination, to provide a framework for our discussion. The principles, though, also apply to issues of gender discrimination. In a 2007 decision striking several voluntary school desegregation plans, Chief Justice Roberts wrote, quote, "The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race," end quote. There's a certain rhetorical flourish and an easy to understand simplicity to this proposed solution to racism and racial inequities that have plagued us since beginning with the enslavement of our fellow human beings in this country. But really, if I can be so bold as to challenge the Chief Justice, I believe this is sophistry. It sounds appealing, and it allows each of us to indulge ourselves, and we can tell ourselves, gee, I don't discriminate, I don't see color. It's up to each of us to take advantage of what this country has to offer, just like I did and my forebears did, and regardless of the past. So it's a tidy formulation, and it might even make sense in a truly meritocratic and race-blind society where every person enjoys the same opportunities. But we don't live in that society. The reasoning in no way addresses the lived experiences of African Americans for generations, Native Americans, and other racial minorities who have continued to suffer the compounded negative impacts of racist laws and policies, like separate but equal, redlining, and barriers to the ballot box. And even though practices like redlining may no longer be legal, that doesn't mean that their long-term damaging impacts, like the inability to build intergenerational wealth through home ownership, don't continue to impede the social, educational, and economic advancement for millions of Americans. That's the reality in California and throughout the country. And that's why the Chief Justice's formulation for solving racial discrimination is misguided. All it does is absolve those of us who have benefited from racial privilege, whether consciously or not, from collectively doing the necessary work to help make sure that all Americans have the same opportunities for success that those who do have privilege have long enjoyed. So to reconsider Chief Justice Roberts' formulation, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is first to acknowledge that racial discrimination stubbornly permeates our society. And we must acknowledge this even if our own forebears weren't personally responsible for racist policies, or even if our own circumstances we don't feel especially privileged. Because collectively, those considered white have been advantaged at every step of the way in our nation's development. Second, we must dismantle barriers impeding the ability of marginalized communities to succeed where they still linger. Fortunately, we've come a long way in that regard. Legally, Jim Crow laws and redlinings are both relics of the past. But laws and policies disproportionately impeding access to the ballot box for too many Latinx and African Americans remain, as this program tonight will also address. Third, and more to the point, we need to take proactive steps to rectify the ongoing negative impact of prior racist policies. We must level the playing field for those continuing to be denied opportunities for advancement and success. And that is what Proposition 16 does. Prop 16 qualified for the ballot by way of legislation, specifically ACA 5 authored by Assemblymember Shirley Weber of San Diego. ADL became an early endorser and active member of the Opportunity for All Coalition, which also sponsored ACA 5. Prop 16 does one thing. It repeals Article 1, Section 31 of the California Constitution, enacted by Proposition 209 in 1996. Prop 209 was one of 3 notorious ballot initiatives of that era. In 1994, voters passed Prop 184, the harsh and inflexible 3 strikes law, which voters recently gutted with Props 47 and 57. Also in 1994, voters passed Prop 187, cruelly denying healthcare, public education, and other services to undocumented immigrants. Thankfully, California courts struck that as unconstitutional before it could be put into effect. So what did Prop 209 do exactly? Starting in 1998, it prohibited public entities from considering race, color, ethnicity, or sex in public hiring, contracting, and education decisions. It ended all public programs designed to open doors to equal opportunity for people of color and women. Today, California remains just one of 9 states with this blanket prohibition. And what have been some of the most harmful effects of Prop 209 on a generation of Californians since 1998? We have some answers and lots of statistics, and I'll provide just a few illustrative examples. This past August, UC Berkeley's Goldman Center for Public Policy published a comprehensive study of applications and admissions to 8 UC campuses between 1994 and 2002, following those students to where they ultimately went to college and what the Californians in the study did afterwards. In sum, it found that the ban had harmed Black and Latinx students specifically by decreasing their number in the UC system and reducing the likelihood of their finishing college and attending graduate school, as well as negatively impacting their earning capacity. Students who would have enrolled at the most selective UC campuses before Prop 209 attended less selective universities in the system. This created ripple effects by squeezing out other Black and Latinx students, who then went to even less selective schools and in turn squeezed out even more students of color entirely. And most interestingly, according to the study, Prop 209 didn't appear to benefit the white and Asian American students who were studied, because high achieving students in those groups generally had more options in terms of other top tier universities also to apply to. Other studies have shown that since 1994, admission rates across all demographic groups have declined, but in the UC system. But those declines through 2019 have been far steeper for Black, Latinx, and Native American students. Indeed, only the category of international saw an increase in admissions. The discussions around Prop 209 often focus on university admissions, but its impact has been much wider. In 2015, the Equal Justice Society, one of ACA 5 and Prop 16's lead sponsors, commissioned a report on Prop 209's impact on state and local procurement contracting. It found that since ending affirmative action policies in 1998, minority and women-owned businesses have been losing $1 to $1.1 billion annually in state and local contracts, including in programs that had to end as a result of legal challenges under Prop 209 in San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco. And what about hiring? Prop 209 has prohibited state and local entities from considering race or gender when hiring public educators, healthcare workers, first responders, among others. The result is a workforce in these fields that often does not reflect the diversity of the state and the communities they serve. Passage of Prop 16 will help foster greater equity in our state. But there are two things that Prop 16 will not do, which are important to note. First, Prop 16 does not require a public entity to implement an affirmative action program. It merely returns us to the status quo before 1998 by allowing them to once again consider such policies should they choose to do so. Second, the initiative will not result in the imposition of quotas in public university admissions. In 1978, the US Supreme Court ruled such quotas unconstitutional in a suit challenging UC Davis School of Medicine's admissions policies. No quotas is the law of the land, and passage of Prop 16 won't change that. Much is being made about opposition to Prop 16 among some in the Asian community. In fact, however, multiple studies have shown that Asian American students and businesses fare better in states that have equal opportunity policies like affirmative action. Universities outside of California that implement affirmative action policies have also seen greater gains in Asian American enrollment. And in addition, research also shows that Asian American business earn more public contracting dollars in cities where affirmative action is legal, such as Chicago and Atlanta, compared to cities where affirmative action is banned, like San Francisco. And I encourage you to visit the Vote Yes on Prop 16 website for a full list of endorsers, and you will see many Asian American individuals, lawmakers, and organizations. And I also note that the Legislative API Caucus also supported ACA 5. Another question is about whether Prop 16 is truly pressing now when we're still reeling from COVID-19 and a recession. When the pandemic began ravaging California, with economic devastation soon following, some despaired of ACA 5's chances of passage as lawmakers grappled with these emergencies. Many important legislative initiatives, including several ADL priority bills on hate crime, for instance, had to be abandoned. In fact, COVID-19 and our economic challenges made passage of ACA 5 and now Prop 16 just that much more compelling. People of color and too many women have borne the brunt of both the public health and economic effects of COVID-19. The disproportionate economic harms on small businesses owned by women and people of color just further underscore the need to return fairness to our public contracting and hiring systems. Passage of Prop 16 will have the additional benefit of ensuring that any government solution to spur economic growth will help the most vulnerable and the most impacted in our state. Employment trends also consistently show that college degrees protect against unemployment when compared to just holding a high school diploma. As California's unemployment rates have skyrocketed, growing an educated workforce in communities disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 will also be essential to our long-term recovery and resiliency. In other words, California is going to need every tool in the proverbial toolbox to restore the economy in ways that support all Californians, not just people like me, fortunate enough to be able to work from home and continue to earn a paycheck. Finally, as for our Jewish community, this question of affirmative action, and in particular quotas, has a nuanced and even a painful past. In the early part of the 20th century, prestigious universities used quotas to suppress the number of Jewish students enrolling in these institutions. Quotas were used to maintain white dominance, and that included restricting Jews. This was the case even though the majority of Jews in America traced their roots to Europe and have since largely come to be viewed as white. Later, the Kennedy administration established affirmative action programs to create more equity for historically marginalized groups. By that time, succeeding generations of Jewish Americans had achieved educational and economic advancement despite facing lingering discrimination. And indeed, that's an accomplishment to be proud of. So Jews did not qualify for the programs, although interestingly, Jewish women did benefit from the programs because the programs, of course, included women. I'll note that in subsequent years, those programs began using quotas, which understandably then sat very poorly with many in the Jewish community. Again, however, they have been ruled unconstitutional. 50 plus years later, times are again different. There are compelling reasons for the Jewish community to support Prop 16, even beyond our imperatives to repair the world and pursue justice. There is a growing and overdue recognition in the Ashkenazi-dominated American Jewish community that fully 20% of American Jews are people of color. They are, for example, Asian American, African American, and Latinx American. And they're also Mizrahi and Sephardic, Jews who trace their roots to the Middle East and North Africa. Prop 16 will therefore directly benefits our own racially and ethnically diverse Jewish community. Supporting it therefore fulfills the mandate from Pirkei Avot: if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, then what am I? And finally, the third prong of Rabbi Hillel's call to action is, if not now, when? The time to act is now. California's 25-year experiment with supposed race and gender neutral public hiring, contracting, and education decisions has failed. That type of system can't succeed in a world where women of color are routinely paid less, given fewer chances to access higher education, and are denied job opportunities. So the way to help redress the ongoing harms of the past and achieve greater equity for all, where a rising tide lifts all boats, is to permit government entities to create and implement programs that level the playing field. And that is precisely what Prop 16 does. So I encourage you to visit voteyesonprop16.org to learn more about how you can assist in this effort. And I thank you.
So you rocked it. So I have.
I'm sorry?
I said you rocked it. I have the questions I had stored up here. You largely answered.
Great. Move on.
That was fantastic. And the questions that the kind of questions that people were asking. One of them really was. Sort of why have any kind of preferences at all? And you talked about that really in terms of sort of the history that got us here and the ways in which many of us have had great privileges over much of that history. I
just want to address the term preference, because I know that that's a term I used to hear in an earlier era, especially in the 90s, when talking about Prop 209 and these issues.
Yeah.
It's not about giving someone a favor, something undeserved, something that will create more imbalance, something that, I like you more than I like the other, right? This is about taking proactive steps to try to, I keep saying it, but level the playing field. Because based on the color of my skin, I don't face the sort of challenges that people in this country with a darker tint to their skin face, and all the attendant disadvantages that comes with, and the way it's compounded, right? So it's not about, it's not zero sum. It's not about giving something that isn't deserved. It is really about just creating opportunities. And and it's interesting too, nobody really talks about, this notion of, oh, it's a preference, or, why just consider, race as a factor. Universities consider all sorts of factors, for instance, when deciding on their classes. They don't just, close their eyes and pick from any number of admissions and say, okay, and, we want our class dominated with people who got straight A's in French, for instance. They're really curating the class that they want. The Supreme Court has ruled that achieving diversity is a compelling reason to allow considerations of race, for instance, in these decisions. And so it's just one of many factors that they consider, like geography, like, frankly, legacy status. We certainly see that a lot. Like whether a person brings an athletic ability, which obviously can be abused, as today's audit, that was just released about UC pointed out, and also prior scandals. Whether the person shows certain leadership qualities, whether there is geographic diversity, whether the person is the first in his or her family to go to college. There are all sorts of issues that they bring together, not just whoever got a straight A in AP English, or even just the highest scores on tests, because they want to create an environment where people will be exposed to different sorts of people and learn from each other, and have all sorts of diversity, racial and gender diversity among them.
So, one of the things we've been reminded of powerfully this week is by the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is that women, in this case, the fact that she was Jewish, I think, was less relevant than the fact that she was female, that women have, including white women, have historically faced discrimination in the academy and other places. And how do you see this Prop 16 sort of addressing that issue?
Well, it's because it's not just about university admissions where women have made great strides. It's also in the hiring of professors, because, women are still, I don't know the stats, but, women are still, I don't have to tell the National Council of Jewish Women about the gender pay gap, for instance. So I don't have like an exact stat on hand about the percentage of women at universities who teach at universities, but I just think we continue to face gender discrimination, and that includes in hiring. And so allowing then these public entities to take gender into account, in particular in fields where, and I don't have it up here right now, where that have sort of been male dominated, like construction firms, transportation type firms, firms where, women haven't always had a huge presence in those firms, but to take into account this is a woman-owned business, and to provide an opportunity where, good old boys clubs and connections and things like that are still exist, will just help those women-owned businesses, especially as, women, again, have borne such a brunt of the fallout from COVID-19. We're still most of the teachers and most of the nurses and most of the housekeepers and moms, and not that dads don't do a lot, but you know what I mean. So it'll be important in the coming years.
So believe me, I know, and I want to thank you, and because this is another topic we could spend all day on. I have to say it's particularly dear to me. I spent my entire professional life in the field of post-secondary education and training.
Really?
And sort of following the studies that you were citing, and anyway, onward. So,
thank you so much. And I'll stick around in case there are questions at the end.
Right. Thanks so much
Thank you
for joining us. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you.
But now we're moving to another critical topic. These are also critical. And this one, again, couldn't be more timely. So Prop 17 is our next topic, and California is one of 3 states that require persons convicted of felonies to complete their prison and parole sentences before regaining the right to vote. Prop 17 is a constitutional amendment that would allow people on parole for felony convictions to vote. I'm sure many of you who are glued to the television about in the current electoral cycle are paying attention to what's going on in Florida and the fight over ex-felons voting there, and this is our fight. So I am really pleased to present Shay Franco-Clausen, who is campaign manager for Prop 17. She's had direct experience with incarceration, both her own and that of family members. And she serves on numerous boards and commissions and advocates on the behalf of social justice organizations. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I've learned a lot. I've been highly impressed with the presentations before me. So it was a lot of information, and I think it rolls right into Proposition 17. As we continue to push for equity and break down systemic racism that has historically created barriers for Black and Brown communities, Proposition 17 is a step forward in ending criminal disenfranchisement, laws that have been in place for generations since Jim Crow. And it's important now, more than ever, that we have inclusion, justice, and fairness. And I just wanted to start off with that because I believe it was such a great presentation that led right into this. Proposition 17 is really about restoring rights, reintegration, recognizing the biases, and creating civic engagement in our communities and public safety. Prop 17 is going to restore the voting rights of over 50,000 Californians that are currently living in our communities, that are paying taxes, taking care of their families, but the one thing they can't do is vote. The one thing I will say is about Prop 17 is while people have completed their prison terms and they reintegrate into the community, parole is not a punishment. It is a time for them to, connect with their families, figure out what they want to do as they face many barriers, as well as equity when it's time for them to get a job. Prop 17 will right the injustices and restore the voting rights of Californians returning home. Biases in the criminal systems, as I said, has impacted Black and Brown communities. Because of persistent systemic racial inequalities in our criminal justice system, 3 out of 4 men in our California prisons are Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous. That means that California's Constitution locks people of color out of the voting booth. We can't have an elected government that represents us all when some of the members of our community are being excluded from our democracy and denied the ability to participate. When we are valued community members, our voices matter, and we're more likely to leave crime behind. Evidence has shown that people who are able to civically engage in their communities after release are 3 times more likely to never commit another crime, which makes us all safer. Research has also found consistent differences between voters and non-voters after release in rates of subsequent arrest, incarceration, and self-reported behaviors. That is why the American Probation and Parole Association and the Association for Paroling Authorities International supports automatically restoring the voting rights upon release from prison because, again, parole is not a punishment. Denying voting rights to people who have returned home from prison, who raise families, hold jobs, pay taxes, gets a driver's license, and is contributing just like you and I to be excluded at the voting ballot sends a very bad message. Restoring someone's rights helps those who have served their prison terms strengthen their connections in their community. It encourages people to think about their role in society. Denying the right continues to send the wrong message. One of the things that I like to talk about when I'm presenting, there's always all these talking points, is when we talk about voter disenfranchisement, we have to think that it stemmed from era of Jim Crow laws that were established here in California as well. And it has been intentional to keep people and people of color out of the voting boxes. And we see that continuously with gerrymandering, closing down voting locations in poor Black and Brown communities. well, it's just another way of disenfranchising our voices. This national movement of restoring voter rights is growing, as you can see on TV. And I can say it's grown in such a meaningful way as we've received the support from the governor, Alex Padilla, the lieutenant governor. Kevin McCartney is actually the author who authored ACA 6 that turned into Prop 17. And I mean, he was supported when he did this by Ashkara, Assemblymember Ashkara, Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo, Senator Scott Wiener, Assemblymember Rob Bonta, Lorena Gonzalez out of LA, Assemblymember Mike Gibson, Mark Stone, even Congressman Ro Khanna, Evan Lowe, Assemblymember here, Malia Cohen, and many more. That's just to name a few. With a coalition of ACLU, ARC, Brennan Center for Justice, Initiate Justice, League of Women Voters, Mi Familia Voters, Vote Allies, White People for Black Lives, and the Voting Rights Lab is just to name another group of organizations that band together that are working with me day in, day out to make sure that we get this message out. The current law can be very confusing, and it's a two-tiered system where some people with past felony convictions can vote and others cannot. This confusion inevitably means that some eligible voters are deterred from going to the voting polls every year. And I do this presentation a lot through communities, through different party affiliations, in schools, reentry centers. And I will tell you 70% of people who have had some sort of criminal history, even if they're not on parole or probation, have thought that they couldn't vote. And that's why it's so important for us this time is to not only pass this, but educate our community so they know once we pass this, they have their rights to vote restored. To me, it's very simple. If we talk about an equitable election outcomes and we talk about everyone registering to vote, using your voice, holding people from voting it doesn't help us have a fair representation, whether it be in our city council, in our board of supervisors, our state senate, our assembly members, all the way up to Congress. And you all have seen that some of these elections have been won by 3 votes, 7 votes, 200 votes. And that's why it's so important if we talk about having a representative body that represents us all, then everyone should be a part of democracy. I could go on and more, but I felt like there was so much great things said that really leads to why we have to talk about the biases, discrimination, and disenfranchisement. It goes right into why we should pass Prop 17. I feel as if there's anything that people can do now is, while everyone's paying attention, there is those 50,000 Californians. It's actually 55,000. I actually checked the numbers. They really are relying for us to see equity, to see inclusion, and they're really relying for all of us to vote yes on Prop 17 and restore their voting rights. At that time, I will go ahead. I don't have much more to present. I leave it open for questions.
So thank you. Well, you don't have millions of questions, but we will try. So somebody who wrote in advance asked just a question of fact, which is, what is the amount of time somebody usually spends on parole, and what's the sort of maximum amount of time somebody could spend?
Well, I mean, the history of excessive sentencing in the justice system is really showing its face now. So someone on parole can be from 3 to 5, 10, or lifetime. Lifetime parole. So
in California?
In California. I met someone today earlier in a presentation before this who was on lifetime parole. And I was like, give me your name and number. I'm going to get you a lawyer. You know, a lot of times it's because of the different, you know, systems, and then judges, if you don't have anyone to represent you, that tends to get those sentences they're very excessive. And so maybe they've done 10 years, or they were tried as a juvenile, as an adult, and then put on lifetime parole once they get out.
So basically then permanently disenfranchised.
Permanently, and it depends on the judge. There's not a set, it really depends on the judge. There's been plenty of cases that are that have come public where judges were using it as a sense to keep this person, disenfranchised.
We all know, I was referencing it earlier, that currently there's a huge effort in Florida two efforts, opposing efforts. One, to prevent parolees who haven't paid off their fines from voting. And it's been in and out of the courts. Now people are raising huge amounts of money to pay off their fines. Are there fines in California like that? Or do parolees have to pay fines before they can vote?
We don't have that same law here. So once their parole ends, they have the right to vote. I saw the question in there, and it was, California. So just so people understand, is there's two systems inside of our local jails in our state. There's misdemeanors and there's felonies. So people that are currently on misdemeanors, they're locked up normally in our county jails. And I work inside our county jails to do voter education registration. So we go into the jails because they can vote. It's state prisons that are and people that are there for felony charges, which they're not allowed to vote in the state prisons. And once they're on parole and they have a felony conviction, they can't vote until the end of their parole term. And as I said before, parole is not a punishment. It's a supervision. It's saying, hey, let me just watch over you while you reintegrate, because the sentence was what they gave them to do the time. They went to a parole board and they deemed them, you can go back. You've done X, Y, and Z in prison. You've shown that you can reintegrate into society. And then they give them parole, which is not an extension of punishment. So then why wouldn't we restore their voting rights upon exiting the prison?
And didn't you say that California is one of a very small number of states that have three? Dare I say, California is quite a liberal state. How come? I mean, do you have a sense of what the history is of how we got here?
Yeah, sadly I do. And so voter disenfranchisement is nothing new to California. And it actually stems from back in 1849 when it was actually written into law here. And then when in 1868, when the 14th Amendment was ratified by 3/4 states, California was a former free state that rejected the 14th Amendment ratification. And then even rejected it in 1870, the ratification of the 15th Amendment. So California has this very long, sad, unfortunate history of disenfranchising voters. That we still feel those Jim Crow laws impacting and plaguing Black and Brown Indigenous communities today, as of September 22nd, 2020.
Wow. So wait, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to read this.
And I put the link inside of the chat room for anyone that wants to click on to sort of see the history.
So somebody asked, there's all these questions coming in. So somebody asked, are there any strong arguments? I mean, what do you think the strongest arguments on the other side?
We really haven't had any, except we had a woman who did come to the first few a couple months ago, because there's endorsements. I go to a lot of endorsements and interviews for, pro and con. She only came to 3 and she never came back. But her argument was that, what about the victims? Giving people their right to vote is going to just devastate, victims of whatever crime or harm that people have caused. And I'll tell you this, that I've been working with people on parole. I worked in prisons and I worked in all these spaces. When people make poor choices, many people have so much resentment and they try to right the wrong. Who knows the circumstances, and many of them try to go and do things to, repay the sin they did, or, go out into their communities and advocate in so many different ways. I just feel as if that argument is it hasn't worked on anything any engagement that we've had together, unfortunately. But I will say this, is someone who is a survivor of human trafficking, is that even as I survived such, very harmful spaces, and I believe that I do things from a victim, survivor, centered lens, even all those who cause me harm, just for me, I still hope they have the right to vote. It's a civil liberty that I would never take from anyone, because once we make the exception, then we make a rule, and then the rule continues to grow, and we make exception after exception. But I do say, as survivors, like I stand with victims too, but this voting rights and the crime, they don't match up. It's a right.
And maybe this is the last question, and maybe it's an obvious question, and let me, which is where, now I have another question, but the first one was, we're assuming that the folks who are affected by this are disproportionately people of color. Yes.
Yes, 3/4.
3/4. Wow. Okay. Then somebody wrote that the rebuttal argument in favor of Prop 17 says that parole is legally part of the prison sentence, and that a convicted felon must successfully complete parole in order to have served their sentence and have voting rights restored. I think you sort of addressed that.
Yeah, that's what we're changing. That was wrote into disenfranchise. That stems from the Jim Crow era that has, plagued all the way across the United States. And so if it's been written into law, it was written by, people that are not relating to the situations of now. I don't know who wrote it personally, but I know that we're trying to change it because we believe that a democracy that is equitable and it has representations of people in its community should include everyone access to vote and make sure that they have the right person that represents their community. And currently right now, those people that are on the extension of supervision can't vote. So
I'm going to say amen. and thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I don't know if you know this, because you're not a member of NCJW, I presume. But NCJW of California is putting a huge amount of energy into reaching out to the people of Florida in particular, but other people who, to ensure that as many people as possible vote. So we absolutely support opening up the franchise to all Americans.
If I could just interrupt you, Barbara, because there was a question about how many people are white that are on. So I just went ahead and pulled up. I just got this as of August 31st. Inside currently the people that are on parole, it's 55,627. Of that, 4,177 are women. So those are custodial parents, pay equity, all those. And then there's 51,450 men. Of that, 24,330 are Hispanic, 14,231 are Black, 13,321 are white, and then 3,745 have, it says other. So I just wanted to give you those demographics of those numbers, because in the person before, we talk about making sure that people have access. Now add another layer, a barrier of having a criminal history to not having access to jobs. And I will say this because it's not my lived experience. I've never been on parole while I'm formally incarcerated, but I was incarcerated as a youth. So it's in my closed record, but at the same time, what it has motivated me to do, I've never made another mistake. I've never, made a bad decision. And I stand here today as an elected official that I represent my county. You mentioned before, I serve on so many different boards. People can change if they were giving opportunities, and that's what happened. I changed my life, and I was giving several opportunities, and I've made systemic impact.
Well, again, amen. So, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank all of you who have joined us. And I am now going to turn over our farewells to my comrade, Claire.
Thank you, Barbara. And Shay, I do want to just have another leg onto what you said, and something that Barbara talked about as well, and that is our Vote Forward NCJW activities that we've been doing. I want to urge everybody on this call to consider in the final weeks of writing letters to get out the vote. They're being directed to underrepresented, low propensity voters. If you go to our chat, there will be the website that you can enter to adopt voters to write these letters to. It's, if it's not up yet, it'll be up shortly. It's Vote Forward at /NCJW California. And I invite everybody to participate in this letter writing activity. So we're coming to the end of this just fascinating webinar. And on behalf of NCJW and our co-sponsoring sections, we want to thank tonight's speakers who just did a fantastic job educating on these extremely important propositions. We appreciate your time, your expertise, and dedication to working toward a more just California. And we're so appreciative of all of you watching this. In the evenings, people start getting tired, they want to wind down. So to be so interested that you have watched our speakers over the last hour and a half is a real testimony to your desire to be educated voters, and we very much appreciate that. You can find the links to each of the propositions in the chat. So you can go to the websites for more information. And we're also going to send to you in an email these important links. As the fall continues, Barbara and I will send you updates on the status of the proposition campaigns, along with tools that you can use for continued advocacy. We look forward to engaging with you after November as NCJW California gears up for a new legislative session in January. We don't know if it's going to be a virtual lobby day as this year, or we'll be able to meet people in our legislators in person, but we will hope that you will join us one way or the other in advocating. Okay, so there's you have the Ruth's Revolution link, so please go to that to see how you can get engaged on the fight over the Supreme Court nomination and process. You have our Vote Forward information about how you can engage in voting. On a final note, we always welcome donations to NCJW California to help us defray costs for programming these kinds of sessions and for our advocacy efforts. So you can see the donation link also in the chat. So on behalf of Barbara and myself, we thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your dedication to fighting the good fight, and have a good evening.